Welcome back, faction. All right, we're going to be go ahead and looking at the main car today and how we exactly are going to start modifying the rear suspension and getting everything situated for the car to be able to make huge power numbers and actually be able to hold all that power without breaking a bunch of stuff. And so we're going to transition now. You guys have seen us look at the interior, look at different parts that are going to be going on the outsides, bumpers, lights, things like that. Now we're going to move on to the actual car and see what we can get done on this rear subframe. So let's go ahead and just dive right into it. All right, guys, in today's episode, we're going to be going ahead and removing the rear subframe from this police charger. And we're going to be changing out some bushings for the actual subframe. We're going to be doing likely some suspension work later. It already has some aftermarket coilovers on it. I want to go to a full rear coilover setup rather than the divorce setup. And then we've already removed the differential and the axles, obviously, since you can see that there's a hole in here where the axle would go, the axle nut. So a lot of that work's already been done off camera. It was just simpler to do it that way so it's not in the way, and obviously the whole powertrain now has been removed from this charger. And so we're going to drop the subframe. We got to get the fuel system, I think, kind of disconnected, and maybe the emergency parking brake. Otherwise we might just disconnect that line a little bit and let it droop. Take off all four corners for the rear subframe, here, and here kind of thing. Drop it. We've got a nice scissor lift now that we're going to be using for dropping subframes on. So it'll be a little bit easier while the car's still in the air. There might be a few things that snag up. For instance, we got to take off the rear shocks first on both sides, since that's technically holding it. But there really isn't too much else that's holding this on. Like I said, the fuel line's kind of in the way, or the filler neck, and then the emergency parking brake. And then we'll see where the actual brake lines are. That's the other thing. That's going to be over on the far side, something like that over there. All right, let's go ahead and start seeing what it's going to take to get this guy off. All right, guys, so you can see that the fuel tank filler, it looks like, is actually in the way of getting the subframe down, so we can put those new bushings in. So we're gonna have to probably drain the fuel tank. It's got probably more than what's on this level right here, and drain it so that we can take off this fitting, so that ultimately the subframe can come down without impeding on that. So we're gonna go and drop the car, siphon out the fuel. It's about the only way you can do it on a modern car, from the top, and get this guy pulled off, probably recapped, just for safety. All right, let's go and do it. All right, guys, so I looked over the car, saw what we need to take off. What I think we're going to start with is the fuel filler neck. So this guy right here comes down and interferes with the subframe. All we got to do is throw it off, but I'm probably going to disconnect the, I'm going to take off the fuel pump hat. We had already taken the fuel pump out a little while ago because we were swapping stuff out with another car. And drain the fuel tank. It's probably got a flap in the fuel tank, as most cars do. But just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and empty the rest of the fuel tank that was in there. So we'll lift it back down, then throw on a pump, take it out, and then we'll go ahead and take off the connection. That should solve the fuel issue. Then we've got to take off like wheel speed sensors on both sides. Let's see what else. The brake lines, I'm probably just going to go ahead and take off the calipers altogether. Is going to be the easiest thing, so we can disconnect it. The emergency brake lines, they go into the back, this cable right here. It's probably going to be a little bit harder, so I might just droop the front of the car. The front line going into the car there. So that might be the easiest guy. And then once that's done, like I said, we just got to take off the damper. There's 2 bolts on both sides for the damper, and that should let us take it out. So let's go ahead and start with the fuel and get some of these other lines out of the way, and then the 4 bolts. I think we should be good. We might play around with a little bit here or there with how it is. It may not be fully disconnected, but at least on the scissor lift, like I said, should be enough for us to play around with the bushings, throw on the new diff that we got, and the diff brace and things like that. So, all right, let's go ahead and get to it. Alright guys, I think we got about everything disconnected. We got the splash shields off. We'll needed to take those anyway because we had to change the fuel lines on this side. And those obscured the front parts of the subframe. So we got that off. Really can't take off the actual emergency brake very easily. At least I don't want to try it yet. We may have to. I have taken this so that it dangles down now, so it'll just come down with the subframe and we can move it forward to work on it. And see if we ultimately need to take it down. We just got the brakes themselves resting right now on it. They should be able to loop through. This one's definitely harder because it's got a piece of steel on it versus this guy. And then we got the dampers removed. So that should be good. Obviously the fuel. The speed sensors are disconnected. And let's see. I think that's about it. So what we're going to do now, I think, is loosen the rear subframe bolts on all 4 sides. And just kind of see how much movement we got. And then once I'm happy, we're going to crib up the subframe. It's got a step subframe. So we'll just crib it with some wood on our table here. And that should allow us to start dropping it. We will see how that works out ultimately. All right, so we will see you guys in a second. All right, guys, we got the subframe out with really no hassle. The brakes came out just like I thought. Luckily, you're able to easily remove that fuel filler hose. It turns out it just pops right out from both sides with a couple of disconnects on a bolt and a connector for the evap system. And then with everything else removed, the only thing that remained is the e-brake, and I think I might be able to disconnect it right there if I can push it out of its clip. It does not look like it's a permanent crimp clamp like I originally thought it was, because you would have to essentially tension it and cut it and put in a new ones, which I don't really want to do. But I might be able to finagle it here in a second and completely remove it from the vehicle, so I can completely wash off this subframe, and we can easily throw in the parts that we need to here. Yeah, so once we get everything cleaned up now, kind of just have to sort out some of the rubber bushings. We got upgraded, not Delrin, but urethane bushings, and probably some of the other bits of rubber. Again, this is an aftermarket BC coilover set up here. We might go to a full coilover set. We'll see. Just depends on what we can get away with here. If you guys didn't notice already, this car had some work done to it. We ended up doing a full adjustable rear control arm set from BMR on both sides. So it's pretty much already upgraded from that point. We're going to clean it up and re-grease everything now that it's out. Luckily, this car only had 20,000 miles on it, and so the bearings and everything, like on the hubs, are going to be like basically brand new. All that kind of like bearing stuff should be fine. The only thing I want to double check is the rubber pieces. So I'm probably going to check the rubber for the rear sway bar. You can already see these are getting old, but these end links are, super cheap to get anyway. So we're going to probably replace those end links. There's one other control arm here that we won't really be able to replace. But otherwise, these rubber bushings are getting replaced with our new urethane ones. I think those are also BMR. And yeah, we'll just kind of look over everything, make sure everything's good, try and clean it up the best that we can, since this car is going to be looking pretty sweet after we're done. All right, let's go ahead and get it cleaned up, see if I can remove that e-brake. All right, guys, we are finally free of the car completely with regards to the subframe. The joints here, luckily for the e-brake on both sides of the rear brakes, is not a permanent joint. Luckily, they're just a slip fit with a backing, and so with a little bit of finesse and some pliers, I was able to get off both sides and get that cable removed. So now that it's fully free, we're gonna go ahead and wheel this guy outside, clean it up, scrub it down, get off all the dust and debris and old lubrication when we put on the control arms and everything like that. Look it over intently, and then we're gonna get ready to throw in the new BMR bushings. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, guys, she is all clean now. We might do a little bit more to get some of the oil off and some of the grease with some alcohol or some kind of solvent. Anyway, it is looking pretty clean, and some of the bushings are still looking real good, like this upper bushing for the rear control arms. Look, just because they were kind of out of the way, they don't look too bad at all, so we might be able to keep those guys on there. Might take them off and grease them up a little bit with some silicone, but otherwise things are looking really good. Jack table really turned out well for this whole activity. So now we're going to go and let this dry, and let's go and take a look at the parts that we're going to be throwing onto this rear subframe for the differential and all that jazz. So it's going to be some pretty nice stuff. Let's go take a look. All right, guys, I got all the parts laid out that we're going to be throwing onto this rear subframe. Got it all cleaned up. So we got the key part, which is a Hellcat rear differential. This one's off of a 22 Hellcat. Now, the key with this guy that makes this whole build possible is that this is a 309 gearing, and this gearing matches essentially the front differential. Since it's an all-wheel drive car, it has to have a matching rear and front axle gearing ratio. And so the front on these are between 307 and 309. These are about 309. You can have a very small tolerance. So again, like probably, I want to say 1 to 2%, and everything will work just fine. So that's the key here. So as you can see, this is a 309, and it's a limited slip. So that's just super handy to have. I think the stock chargers, a lot of them, just come with an open rear diff. But having an LSD obviously means that you're not spinning one wheel all the time. So definitely key, especially since this build is all about traction. So to go along with this, pretty much brand new Hellcat diff, we went ahead and got a brace as well. So this is an aluminum brace from, I forget the name of the company. I'll probably put it down in the description below. But this brace ensures that under high torque, high horsepower applications, that the case here does not fracture, just because it'll have so much loading torque or shock applied to it, especially during launch, and as well as not just from the torque from the motor that's coming in, but also the wheel hop that could happen from it. Since this is a independent rear suspension, it can still kind of wheel hop or shudder since it has more angular motion on it. Anyway, any kind of movement that this case sees potentially could crack the aluminum casted housing. What a lot of people do is go to a full billet housing on other cars, usually like front diffs or something like that. Otherwise, having a brace definitely makes sure that the case cannot torque so much within itself once that torque is applied or received from the ground. And so we've got a strut here made of solid aluminum. Looks like it's a billet piece, and then powder coated. And what it's going to happen is we're going to remove those two lower screws from the differential and bolt this guy on, and this allows us to then put it with some extra hardware in this rubber isolator onto the lower back here. These hockey pucks we got holding it up are in the way, but there's essentially some bolts. My finger's touching it, so like right about here, and I think right about over here, and they put in some T slip nuts through these two holes, and you actually brace that aluminum to the steel subframe, and so you get additional points of contact that don't allow that case to torque quite as much. And risk actually destroying the entire differential. Because as soon as you do that, essentially it's a catastrophic failure and your differential is gone. And other things could relate from that. So anyway, so that's the key here that's making it work. Like I said, we've got the urethane bushings. We'll talk about that here in a second. The other thing that we wanted was to make sure that the axles, especially on the rear, would not fail. So we've got some drive shaft shop rear axles along with the speed sensor rings, and so these are, I think, 35 spline, and these are like the level 3 or 4, so they're like 1400 horsepower rated. So without a doubt, these axles are not going to break for basically anything we're ever going to throw at it. Really like super beefy, high quality made axles. It's just like crazy just how nice they are. These guys mated to the internal part here on this end, the other end going to obviously the outer hub, and then fit in. So once we get those wheel speed sensors mounted on, we will be able to throw those guys. into the subframe. And the last key piece, like I said, we got some nice urethane BMR bushings for the actual subframe itself, because trying to constrict the subframe movement, especially on an independent rear suspension, that's why most people end up going to a live axle if they're doing any kind of drag strip stuff. But definitely trying to put the power to the ground. You want to try and reduce as much flex as you can on a subframe. And so basically everything here is trying to stiffen up the entire rear powertrain and rear subframe, so that you can put as much power to the ground on top of us having all-wheel drive. So again, as much as we can get done, this build is almost an identical build to what a typical rear-wheel drive Hellcat setup would be. And so once we get everything installed, you know, when we're running the car rear-wheel drive, it'll be just like any other really souped-up rear-wheel drive Hellcat, Demon, Red Eye, something like that. But then we have the whole all-wheel drive stuff that we'll get to in a while as well. But the rear part of this, almost identical to a typical Hellcat that you would see, Charger Hellcat. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get to work in the next episode, throwing all these parts in. And yeah, this is gonna be a pretty cool setup. I mean, this is like a crap ton of brand new parts going into it, all prepared for like 1,500 horsepower, whatever we can throw at it, as long as you do it smartly. So, all right, guys, hope you enjoyed this episode from No Traction Faction on the Charger. We're gonna have another one here coming soon, and check out some more.